What was the dumbest thing you thought as a child? I used to think that once you finished a grade in primary school you became smarter than the teacher of that grade. That I would have to change my name when I grew up. I don't know why, but I thought my name was suitable for a child, but definitely not for an adult, and I couldn't imagine being an adult with my name. I even talked to my mother about it, saying that at some point we'd eventually have to go to court to have it changed to something more adult sounding. I used to believe that night is brought about by clouds, dark ones, of course. Never felt the need to clarify this with anybody, it was an obvious fact. That a blowjob meant you blow air in a boy's general direction. Thanks to my older siblings for making me believe that one lol. That if you drink while peeing you'll keep peeing until you stop drinking. When I was really young, I was convinced I was pregnant. I'm a man BTW with a baby cat named Bridget. My family decided to see how long I would believe this, so they never told me how ridiculously impossible that was. I went on believing it for about 5 months. That's how long little me thought cat pregnancy lasted. And then when the baby never came, I went to my mom and asked when Bridget would be born. She finally told me that boys can't get pregnant and humans can't give birth to cats. I was traumatized. Little me was so excited to be a cat father, and then it was ripped away from me. I was such a stupid kid. Edit. Since so many people keep asking. No, I never ended up getting a cat, and no I didn't trick a cat mayo. This world been around 6 years old, and I was raised Catholic and thought God put babies in your stomach, so I thought he put a cat in me. And as for the name, I just really liked the name Bridget, and I still do. I was very young, and I blame Wizard of Oz, but I believed that a tornado was just one big phenomenon that continuously happened and spun from state to state, country to country. I also live in the South, so we have frequent tornado warnings. So I vaguely remember a time we had 2 or 3 warnings in 1 week, and I was scared the single tornado would come to our town and never go away. When I was a young kid, maybe between 5 to 9, my dad took me to the tiny grass runway airport in my town, and we went on a short plane ride in a small Cessna around the valley. My dad sat in the back, and I was up front with the pilot. While we taxied off the ramp and out to the runway, I was given permission to move the yoke. I thought I was steering the aircraft the whole way. I told my mom that I taxied the plane. In school I told my class that I taxied the plane. In fact, it was so strong a memory that I grew up remembering the memory without evaluating the experience. I was home on leave from a naval aviation squadron when I was talking about that flight with my dad, and I was thinking about it. And I had this long pause. And I said, "Holy shit, Dad, I just realized that I wasn't steering that Cessna." My father laughed his ass off. I was under the impression that there were tiny rats that lived inside of my stomach, and when they ran in their wheels for exercise it would make me need to pee. I believed hamburger and hot dog buns were only available for restaurants, not civilians. Mom used sliced bread toasted to obliterate the gums at home to make burgers and hot dogs. I believed that until the age of 10. I remember watching the movie Cocoon with my grandparents. I could not have been more than 4. For some reason I deduced that, in order to become adults, children had to die in these pool cocoons and be reborn old. I freaked my cousins out and had a whole group of kids crying at a holiday party over our impending doom. Ruined Christmas pictures that year. That there's a tiny human inside the TV who executed what the remote was telling him to do. For example, when you press the button to increase the volume, he is being hit in a specific way that lets him know that he has to go and manually increase the volume. I always thought that kids were born with your chute, so one day you would go to the toilet and take a dump, and then if you looked down there would be a child. And I thought that if you didn't check you might accidentally flush your baby. I thought that there would be a baby inside every girl's stomach as soon as she is born, and inside that baby's stomach too there would be a tiny baby. Cycle goes on, and that the baby keeps growing as we grow, and after getting married the doctors will cut the stomach and take the baby out to make space for another baby. My uncle is a priest for an obscure Hindu offshoot religion, and he told me quite young that I shouldn't play sport because each person only gets a set number of breaths in their life, and getting out of breath use them up quicker. I used to spend hours laying in bed trying to make my breaths as long and slow as possible. In fairness, I actually have a decent lung capacity as an adult, so maybe it had a positive effect. That the Underground Railroad was a literal secret underground subway style steam engine that Harriet Tubman was the conductor of. I was vaguely aware of a TV show called Ironsides about a lawyer in a wheelchair. Whenever I heard the word paralegal, I thought it meant a paraplegic lawyer. It made sense to me that people in wheelchairs could make excellent lawyers based on the nature of the job and their physical limitations. I thought if you left a video game on, then a character would come out of the TV and kill you. I was a bit paranoid as a small kid. I wasn't afraid of being on a plane and it crashing because I thought that as long as I could get to the window/door quickly, I could just jump out the second before it hit the ground. My dad lost his wedding ring in the bay during a fishing trip. Had lost weight, his hand was wet and probably fish slimy, and it just fell right off and was lost forever to the water. I was absolutely inconsolable. It took my parents quite a while to get me to calm down enough to be able to explain why I was so upset about it. I thought it meant they were no longer married anymore. Lol. I thought that the hockey player Peter Taglianetti was actually two people, a man named Pete Tagli and his sidekick Eddie. That babies were inside their mom's literal belly. If she swallowed a cherry tomato whole, I thought it would land and bounce on the baby's head. I grew up around the time of the release of the Star Wars prequels. I vividly remember asking my brother as to why they released the sequels New Hope etc. before they released The Phantom Menace, as it made no sense when I was 11 and a prequel was a wild new concept to me. He had me convinced, embarrassingly until I was about 15 over 16, that the reason they released the sequels first was because there was a fire at the studio and it burned all the original tapes, so they had to reshoot them. I was so freaking dense. I thought Wichita, Kansas was where all the witches lived. I also thought Jefferson County was where the Jeffersons lived. Not something I believed, but a harmless prank I used to play on my kids. There is a highway we use that has several long gentle curves over a 5 to 6 mile stretch. One day when my younger son complained that the sun was in his eyes, he was about 3 at the time, I had the idea to pretend that I had a personal relationship with Mr. Sun. I saw that the highway was going to curve, so I had a conversation with Mr. Sun explaining the situation and asking him to please move over so that he wasn't shining in my son's eyes. I drew out the conversation and timed it so just when Mr. Sun agreed, we would start the curve, and it looked like he was moving over and out of my son's eyes. Then after another curve, the sun would be in my other son's eyes, so I asked politely for Mr. Sun to move again, just as we went around the next curve. This went on for almost a year before my wife explained to them what was going on. It was hilarious in the meantime. Edit, a word. The inside of my stomach was another village with their own villagers. Every time I drank, it rained. Every time I ate, it fed the people. A tummy ache was because the villagers were unhappy. I knew that babies normally came out of vaginas, but my partially deaf friend didn't. He told me he was born out of his mom's butt. For a long time, I thought that people with disabilities accidentally came out of butts instead of vaginas, and that was how they got their disabilities. I used to think that the sunlight rays piercing through overcast days were how new Power Rangers were selected. I wanted to be a Power Ranger really badly, so I was always sad when I couldn't be in a ray. My parents gave me a book about the birds and the bees that was illustrated. They showed a couple in bed in the missionary position. In that same book, there was a picture of a man's erect penis, which was shown as parallel to the floor as he stood. The book didn't explain that the penis is somewhat flexible. There was a diagram of the vagina and uterus, but no picture showing the naked woman. I didn't have any sisters and my parents weren't the kind of parents that walked around naked or semi-naked, clothed at all times. For the longest time I thought I was deformed. My vagina was between my legs when those pictures made it look like it should be on my stomach. I was horrified and I would scream if anyone opened the bathroom/bedroom door while I was changing or using the bathroom, because my deformity would be discovered. Edited because perpendicular and parallel are different. Editing because I'm astonished by how many of us thought our bodies weren't normal. Giant group hug. We're all okay now. I thought that American football players' shoulder pads were just their shoulders. Obviously they were just humans with very pronounced shoulders, and because of that they were the ones selected to play in the NFL. That cruise control in the car only worked on straight roads, as in it locked the steering of the car into only going straight. I thought the Christ on the crucifix at my elementary school was a cool man reclining on a hyper-modern, minimalist space vessel. Took him from the wall during break and made him soar through the room, dramatizing his mad flight with epic clip-generated engine sounds. Just when I staged his collision with a sandwich, the teacher came in. I used to think my mom was such a good shopper. She would pick out all these groceries, and when she got up to the checker, she would only give them one piece of money, and they would give her several pieces of money back, and we got to keep the groceries. My dad taught me that to change the TV channel you use a remote rather than a remote. I knew that remote was a word, but remote was also a separate word, what you used for the TV. I believed this up until I was 17, when I forced my high school boyfriend to look it up in the dictionary to prove he was saying it wrong. My dad still finds this hilarious. This is a wild ride, folks. When I was a little girl, my grandpa told our family this story that he used to call the chocolate head. He told us that he was born with a head encased in chocolate, and the doctors and nurses had to eat it off. Despite already being eaten, the reconstructed chocolate head floated back to him when he was a toddler, telling him, "Remember me, I'm the chocolate head." I remember looking all throughout my grandpa's house to seek out this floating, talking replica of my grandpa's head made out of chocolate. Now, my grandpa is on so many medication, he actually might believe his own story. I was very confused about how Jesus was born in December and then they killed him in April. Somehow I missed the fact that 30 odd years passed between these events. I asked my mom once why people had grey hair. Without missing a beat, she simply said, "From having kids." For many years I thought there was some biochemical process after having kids that caused one's hair to turn grey. I eventually learned different. Also figured out where I got my propensity for smartassery. I remember throwing a fit right before first grade started because I believed that the reason I was not a grown-up was because my parents wouldn't let me. I had the idea in my head that everybody else from preschool were now grown-ups and drove their cars and went to their jobs, and I was still a kid because my parents were forcing me to be one.